Hello to the viewer. Now before I begin my video, I've got to say that viewer discretion is advised, as I may be sharing some stories that could make people a little uncomfortable. And to preface this video, I am not a psychologist, psychotherapist, therapist, anything of the sort. I'm just highly interested in psychology. I've read a lot, and this is what I've learned from my book. So now with that, all the legal stuff out of the way, here goes my book review on The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel A. van der Kolk. A very great read. When I got through this book, it truly amazed me. Some of the stuff is repeated, and you could go on and Google and find some of the tips in the book, but the stories that were captured and the different methods that were shown to potentially deal with trauma were profound, and I've got quite a few actionable tips and steps from the book. So now, where do I begin? In his book, in the very beginning, he mentions and talks about what trauma is, and he gives accounts of different individuals, such as military men who've had PTSD, who do things like drive motorcycles at random hours and can't find any excitement in their family life except when they're dominating, having to win, or putting themselves in danger. And one specific story that I remember from the book was about a couple in their mid-40s. One man was named Stan, and the woman's name was Ute. They were married, and they were driving about 20 years or so ago. They were driving from Ontario, Canada to Detroit, Michigan on a business trip, and they're strolling along, long streaming through, knowing that, hey, we're going to have a productive meeting and business trip. Well, what happens is a fog blankets their vision, and they don't know where they're at. And then suddenly, they see chaos, they feel chaos, they slam on their brakes, and they end up in a gigantic pileup, an 87-car pileup, the largest road disaster in Canadian history. Many people were injured. In fact, they were the 13th car. And before they got out of their car, they were actually pinned in their vehicle, the couple, Stan and Ute. And when they were in their vehicle, they noticed in the collision of cars, there was a girl trapped in a car who was essentially screaming help. She wanted to get out. She was pinned. And they saw her lit on fire. And the couple couldn't do a thing about it. And she burned to death. Luckily, the two of them survived, and they made it out. But because of this traumatic moment, it was very difficult for them to live their lives. And so they sought therapy. And van der Kolk uses this story and many others to show that it just takes one huge moment like that to leave an imprint on us. And though much of it is from our childhood and our early years, much of it can come from our adult years as well. And one of the big takeaways he leaves in the very beginning of the book is that one who suffers from trauma cannot separate their past from their present. It's like they relive it over and over and over again. They cannot put space between the past. It's not to say to get rid of it, but to them, it's what's here and now. They can't separate the sensations, the feelings, and the emotions. And so that's what van der Kolk and therapists and the trauma centers try to remedy. And that's the very beginning of the book. From there, he shows a few statistics, such as the fact that 1 in 5 Americans have been abused. 1 in 4 Americans grew up with alcoholic parents, and then 1 in 3 are involved in violent marriages or there's physical violence within it. And those numbers to me were quite interesting. They were staggering to me. I know it happens behind closed doors, but it was frightening to see that those statistics and the percentages were so high. It's like, man, it's that common, really. And so then he goes from there and he actually explains in a very simple way how the parts of our brain work. And the main focuses he chooses are the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, and the thalamus. Now, what are these three parts? The thalamus, he says, is like the cook. It's in the middle of your brain, the midbrain section, and what it does is it collects all the sensations and the data around you, and it makes it like a primordial soup. It pushes it all in there, and then other parts of your brain get to sort that out. The amygdala, which is a walnut-shaped organ in the middle of your brain as well, is the thing that's existed since primitive times. It shows you when you're fearful, when you're hungry, when you're thirsty, all the things that make up fight, flight, or freeze happen in the amygdala, and he calls that the smoke detector. When some sound happens like that, that's the amygdala kicking on. When your heart rate kicks in and everything starts to get crazy around you, the amygdala has a huge part in that. And of course, something like that kept us alive for the longest time, but unfortunately, it's a little overactive in this society today. And then, last but not least, he talks about the prefrontal cortex. So right here in the middle of our forehead, stretching a little far back. And that part of our brain was the last part of our brain developed. And that is what he calls the watchtower. Basically, we can use it to mitigate trouble, to keep us calm, to swim through all the data and relax just a little bit more, to not get so crazy and fearful. And in the book, he uses a metaphor that's been used through many brain studies: the rider and the horse. The rider is like our calm, logical prefrontal cortex. When everything's good, it keeps us calm, it keeps us level, and everything's great. But when things start to go haywire and our emotions kick in, the horse has the control. The horse goes wherever it wants to go, bucking like crazy, jumping all over the face, kicking you in the face, throwing you off and stomping all over you. And all you can do as the rider is try your best and hang on. And that's how he explains our parts of the brains. The rider and the horse is basically the separation between our logic and our emotions, though he shows in the book that, of course, we can't have our logic without our emotions, can't have our emotions without our logic. So then he labels the brains and shows us in a very detailed way what the brain parts do. And then from there, he starts to get into the solutions, where of course he mentions psychotherapy and the way we talk, which he mentions as top to bottom, right? So we need to often talk these things out. We need to put the puzzle pieces together in order to separate our past from our present. But the problem is that though talking can be a solution, it doesn't automatically get rid of the trauma. And so he goes from these talking, the fact that we use talking to get rid of things and to provide solutions, he mentions that one of the problems that prevents it is that we use our words for things that occur outside of ourselves, but it's hard for us to label our emotions or the sensations that go within. We know very little. There's a much more unique experience in here that we can't express. And so from there, he goes and he mentions a few different other solutions. He mentions meditation and breath control. And he also mentions mindfulness, or paying attention to your surroundings. What is that sensation you feel on the hair on your fingertips? How is your heart feeling right now? Why is the muscle on your face doing that? Just notice it. Don't judge it. And when you do these types of activities, it gives you a chance to feel rooted in your own body and to keep you in the present, here, and now. And of course, he also mentions yoga. He mentions another therapy called EMDR, which basically stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is essentially where the one practicing takes a finger and waves it like this, almost like a type of hypnosis in the front of someone's eyes. And what the patient does is he relives all his emotions, the trauma, the tragedy, any of the craziness that happened. And all the practitioner does is asks them to notice things, notice that, or what happens next. And basically the patient feels into and talks themselves through the process. And when it does this, when they take the finger like this, strangely enough, there are studies that have shown that it's decreased major traumatic symptoms in patients as compared to using any types of drugs, right, like Prozac or any selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, any drugs to boost the chemicals in your brain. Any of these other strategies, EMDR was beating. And they don't know exactly why yet, but one of the theories is that when you move the finger across someone's eyes like this, your eyes move back and forth. And of course, when you're sleeping, you close your eyes. When you're dreaming, your eyes are going through saccadic motions. That's what they're called, where they're rapidly going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So they're thinking that it ties to your dreams and brings out those inner memories. Then from there are methods like improv, which is interesting because I'm beginning to do improv, where it allows the patient to feel into who they are. They get to act a different role. They get to notice different parts of themselves, because we often feel like we know ourselves, right? One of the famous statements, or one of those things that all our parents or people around us tell us is, know yourself, right? And we all kind of know what it means, but we can't really logically explain it to anybody. And of course, I don't believe anyone truly knows who they are. You might know a little bit about yourself, but you don't know who you are. And you have many different parts of yourself. And so, Van der Kolk goes to explain that all of us being complicated humans have different parts. We have the courageous part of ourselves. We have the depressed part of ourselves. We have the kind part of ourselves. We have the villain hidden in us. And when one does improv or any type of acting, we get to integrate those different parts. We get to ask why they served us, what they're protecting, and what we can do about it. There's a therapy that dives into that. And the goal is to integrate all those parts of ourselves to make us more complete and more whole. To show that all of our emotions and our feelings are A-okay. And then along those lines, he mentions a psychosomatic therapy where patients relive or they reenact what happened in their past. So if they have a small group of people, they'll pick someone to be their mom. Say their dad was abusive. They'll pick someone to be their dad. The therapist will have them play all these characters. They'll pick on the audience and they'll put them in different spots. The individual who's the patient gets to pick where they get to sit, what they say, and each of the people basically act out their roles. And then eventually, the patient gets a semblance of control. They can, in other words, flip the script and write a more positive future for themselves to tell that audience member who's playing their dad what they did wrong, to tell their mom what they needed to do, and so on and so forth, to basically help them separate from that past. And that was good. All that stuff I just listed were all actionable tips. And he also goes into, of course, neuroscience and giving us a sense of agency and choice, and how dealing with trauma, in his opinion, is the number one thing we need to work with in our society. And he makes a good argument for it. Really, he does. After reading this book, I do have a stronger sense that the body truly keeps the score. And if I were to rate it, I'd give it a 9.5 to a 10. I'm sure things could have been broken down in a simpler way, but overall, this book right here is a treasure. It's a gem. It is a must read for anyone who wants to look at it. Put whatever little if I had little emojis, I'd be putting happy face, happy face, happy face, flame, flame, 2 thumbs up. That's what I would do with this book. So for all of you, this book, The Body Keeps the Score, wonderful read. And I'd say the one thing to get out of this book is that we're all affected by trauma. And if we all do our part to understand it, cope with it, and perhaps overcome it, many of the problems of the world can potentially be solved. And that is my book review. I thank all of you. I thank you, viewer, for watching this video. Please like, comment, or subscribe. And I'm looking for any feedback, anything to make my videos and my channel more exciting. So until next time, guys, I hope you guys all have a good one.